over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. I tell you all the time about all the great content that's over there. Please go check it out. Support our writers. They do an excellent job. Kyle Hunter's College Basketball Daily Picks piece coming up here this afternoon. Parker Michaels already with his morning line report out for the NHL. You've got, golf previews from me. We'll have NASCAR coming up here in about a month's time when that returns. We'll have a good UFC preview this week from a new UFC writer. We've got NFL, NBA, college basketball content. You name it, we've got it over at BangTheBook.com. While you're there, get involved with our free pick contests as well. And go to YouTube.com, search Bang the Book. Check out all the video stuff that we're doing over there. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. Sign up at DSI using that promo code BTB and the number 200. 100% deposit match bonus up to $500 for the Sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus up to $500 for the live casino as well. At BetDSI, it's only a game until you bet it. Two guests on the program here today. The first, Bryan Leonard, professional handicapper over at WagerTalk.com. Bryan, how's it going today, man?
It's going pretty good. A little strange weather in Vegas this week. A lot of rain. We don't usually get a lot of rain, some fog going in, but it's a little bit different. But the problem is a lot of people don't know how to drive in the rain, and we've had snow a couple times, and that's the same thing here. So I'm staying off the roads.
Yeah, this weekend we're supposed to get our first big snowstorm of the year here in Ohio, and I know everyone's going to forget how to drive in snow. So that ought to be a whole lot of fun for everybody out there on the roads. But speaking of Ohio, speaking about fun, speaking about winter, speaking about, things that I guess people aren't really used to, the Cleveland Browns, 30-1 over at Westgate Superbook to win the 2020 Super Bowl. That would be Super Bowl 54. You and I were talking about this a little bit before we started recording here that, this is a team that's perennially 100-1 or higher to win the Super Bowl. Now it feels like people are tripping over themselves to bet them at 30-1.
Yeah, it reminds me of back when TBS came around when the Atlanta Braves were America's team. I think the Browns have been so bad for so long, and everybody likes the underdog, that the Cleveland Browns are turning into America's team. We talked about the 30-1. I wouldn't bet them at 30-1, but from what I understand, when they come out with the season win numbers, I've been told 8.5, 9 would be the season win numbers, and you could see in this division, the division is a little bit weaker coming up for the following season. Obviously, Pittsburgh's having a lot of their problems, so it's not out of the realm to think that the Cleveland Browns can win that division, and that's something we haven't heard since the days of Ozzie Newsome on the playing field.
Yeah, there's so much excitement right now with Freddie Kitchens and two really strong coordinator hires as well with Todd Monken and Steve Wilkes. I think that's just as important, if not more important, than the hiring of Kitchens, who, obviously has a good rapport with Baker Mayfield. I get it. I understand the price, and I would imagine that, probably when we see some updated odds from Jeff Sherman or Jake Craigie or whoever, over there at the Superbook, we'll see Cleveland 20-1, 18-1, something like that, because, this is one that generated a lot of buzz yesterday when these numbers were put up. And, hey, like you said, I get it. Pittsburgh, obviously problems with them, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. Mike Tomlin seems to have lost the team a little bit. It's about that time for Ben Roethlisberger to say he's contemplating retirement again. I don't think Lamar Jackson's a long-term solution for Baltimore. So, if you get Cleveland in there at 30-1, you've got some immediate hedging value. And, of course, if they win the division, they get a home playoff game in Cleveland, which would be some kind of atmosphere, to say the least. So I get it. But for everyone tripping over themselves, everything going on with Cleveland is very much built into this price.
Yeah, just go back and look at how 8.5, 9-win teams, their season projections and what they were on the future board for the beginning of the year, and they're all in that same range. So, it's something to get excited about, but we all know that when you're betting on sports and you're going to have a lot of upstart young teams that come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden one year they're really good. But for the most part, when you look at the sports overall, especially in, basketball and football, you got the same teams each and every year. And once again, a little segue into the NFL, we've got the Patriots once again. The Chiefs were a little bit surprised. The Rams were expected to be there. The Saints were expected to be there. So it's very tough, even though you have a young team. For example, the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA, right now, they're playing terrific ball, and they've got an all-star player, an MVP type of player. But what they do in the regular season is not exactly what you do in the playoffs. And even though Milwaukee right now is very good in the NBA, it's a team that's going to have some growing pains once they get to the playoffs, because this isn't a team that's gone very far in the postseason.
All right, well, let's see if growing pains are going to be a problem in the NFL playoffs here this weekend. We've got the LA Rams, 3.5-point dog, pretty much extra juice across the board here, -115, -120 in that type of range as they go out to take on the New Orleans Saints. First road playoff start for Jared Goff. Obviously, Drew Brees has been through this a time or two, and New Orleans, of course, getting that win at home last weekend. What do you think about the line right now where it's sitting, Brian, with plus money on the -3.5 for New Orleans?
This is interesting to me because when you get down to this part of the schedule, future bets are something that has been put into the accounting of what the line should be. And from what I understand is the most vulnerable team in the NFL from a future standpoint for the books is the Rams. So trying to get a little bit of money on New Orleans in order to balance out that a little bit on the Rams. And the way I look at the game, and I haven't made any decisions yet on what I'm going to do for this weekend, so I'm not going to have a lot of final say here, but when I take a look at these two teams, I probably have them pretty much equal. In the lines, both of these games in the 3 range are telling me the teams are all pretty equal. But you've got the Saints playing at home, and in a playoff game, I've got to believe the Saints' home field is probably worth about 4 points. Then you take a look at the home-road dichotomies of these two quarterbacks. Drew Brees at home, sure, they got off to a slow start last week, and that may be part of the reason why the line's a little bit short in my estimation here. He's been terrific at home. They played great ball at home. The Rams, you take a look at Goff's home-road dichotomy. He's been lousy on the road. And when you've got a team playing with a quarterback that has not performed well on the road, going into what I consider one of the top 3, Seattle and Kansas City and New Orleans, to me, are the top 3 home field advantages, that tells me that the line should be higher than what it is. But because of the money they've got coming in on the Rams, they need to try to get some New Orleans money in there. From what I'm understanding, the Rams have a lot of people are trying to get that hook on the Rams. So I wouldn't be surprised if this thing ends up at the 3 range. So if you're looking to play the Saints, there's no hurry to do it. If you want the Rams, I think the Rams plus the 3.5, you're not going to see that by game time. I don't see that happening by game time. So I haven't done anything yet. I'm leaning with the Saints in this one, but I'm going to let the market play out a little bit where I think I can get a little bit better number later on in the week if I do decide to play the Saints. Interesting enough, the 2 games that are being played this weekend were also played earlier. This is rematch situations, and both of those games had very high scoring outputs. Obviously, playing in the Dome, the weather's not going to be a factor. In the other game, it will be a factor. So it's interesting that these lines have come out in the 54, 57 range after they were basically provided 80 points earlier this season. And that's something that a lot of people are going to say, well, they scored 80 before, they're playing in the Dome. This has got to be an easy over bet. But you got to read a lot more into these games and the adjustments and the differences between how these teams are playing now as they did before. I think both the Rams and especially the Saints now are more into running the football, especially the Saints are more into running the football than they were earlier. I think in that earlier game in the NFC passing was number one, and they just went down the field passing the ball on each other. So they didn't have a lot of running attempts. I would think a lot more running would be involved in this game here because both teams feel really good about the running game. Obviously, the Rams do have some injury concerns with Gurley, but the Saints, I think, are going to come into this trying to establish a run a little bit better, which obviously will help them when they're playing a team with such a fast offense as the Rams are with their big passing game. So if you're taking a look at the total, just don't assume it's 25 points less that it's an automatic over because the game may not be played out the same way.
Well, one thing I do want to mention here, and you're not the first person on the show this week to mention the home road splits for Jared Goff. I mean, those numbers are skewed a little bit by just how bad he was in that very bitter cold game at Soldier Field. Threw 4 picks in that game, only completed 45% of his passes for 180 yards, also was sacked 3 times, and it was very clear in that game that he was extremely uncomfortable, totally out of his element. Now, obviously, here inside the dome, you've got crowd noise, you've got difficulty communicating with the offensive line, calling out blitzers, audibling if you want to do that at the line. So there are concerns about that for sure, but I think that, and I don't want to, call you out for this specifically because I have heard this from other people, but I think that maybe some of those home road splits are a little bit overblown because that one outlier was just so bad.
It very well could be. And keep in mind, this is a kid from California. Went to play college football in California, so he hasn't been in too many of those games with the snow, with the really cold weather. And as you pointed out, he won't have to deal with that here. Still, when you're taking a look at the Rams, on the season, I much prefer them at home than on the road. But we will see. It's just another thing to take a look at. And basically we're in the business of making educated guesses. And you're not always going to get everything working in your favor. A lot of it is guesswork. And there's no guessing in my mind that Drew Brees will play with very much confidence and have a lot of success at home with this offense against the Rams defense that has at times been struggling. And the thing with the Rams defense is they put a lot of pressure on the quarterback, but Drew Brees in the last game, I believe it was 2.8 seconds, he was getting the ball out. So last time they played, the Rams have such a great pass rush, they never even got to Brees. So unless the Rams do something different, I can still see New Orleans putting some good points on this board, and we'll just have to see if the Rams can match it.
Well, and again, I mean, crowdsourcing opinions here for this week. There's a lot of different points I need to bring up. I need to play both sides of the fence quite a bit. So, I was just playing a devil's advocate role in terms of Jared Goff and, the home road splits and all that. But, I mean, there are a lot of talking points and a lot of factors here, and obviously we can get into all of them when there are just 2 games on the NFL card. But let's transition to the other game here, New England and Kansas City. Kansas City, 3-point favorite. A lot of reduced juice out there right now, Brian. Does that surprise you?
It definitely does. As I just mentioned, that I think the Kansas City home field is one of the best in the league. And, obviously these 2 teams played each other earlier. But, keep in mind, just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, well, actually, it was last week, where the Chargers were taking tons of money against this New England team, and everybody said, the receiving core is battered. Brady can't throw the ball downfield anymore. Gronk's just not himself, and he hasn't been for the last half of the season. All these hits are really catching up to him, and everybody was all over the Chargers in that game. And now all of a sudden, 1 week later, oh, here we go, and New England's back again. Well, we all knew New England was better than what they were playing. They always seem to play better on the field than their stats indicate. But now at the line to 3, I was a little bit surprised. I thought this was probably going to be a 3.5 because of how well the Chiefs have been this year, and then they looked so good last week. So I think the line is a little bit short here. But once again, we're early in the week. I have made no final decisions at all. Who knows if I'll even be on the Saints come the weekend because of it being so early, and I still got a lot of work to do on these games. But the one thing that I do have a little bit of interest here is the total, and this thing is dropped a little bit. It's sitting at, I believe, 55 now. 54 is a somewhat key number if you can consider games in the 50s with key numbers, 51, 54. The total's going down here because they keep talking about how cold the weather is. I have not heard anybody talk about wind, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, where the cold weather doesn't mean nearly as much as what the wind is, and if the wind's 20 miles an hour or more, that's where you get the lower scoring games. And we also have two teams in Kansas City and New England that can run the football a little bit, and the opposition is a little bit prone to giving up some yardage on the ground. So I could see why people would look to get ahead on the under here, but these two teams, they've got excellent quarterbacks. Tom Brady, obviously a Hall of Famer. We've probably got the MVP going for Kansas City. These teams could put some points on the board, and even in the cold weather, you're going to slow everything down a little bit because people can't just run as fast as they could before when it's nice and warm. But the defensive players have the same problem as they do normally, and they're just going to be a step slow against these two offenses, especially I think New England could really take advantage of throwing the ball to the running backs, having some advantage there. The running game and the short passes to the running backs. Basically, what Brady did last week, he doesn't throw the ball far any longer. They're not into the big play anymore. They really don't have those kind of guys on the Patriots anymore. They don't have Randy Moss on that team any longer, so they've got to take advantage of the short passing game. I think they can have a lot of success doing that in this game, and even if the game's cold, that's not going to affect that at all. They have a couple of drops because they're cold, but I think this game, I'm hoping we get under 54. If I get a 53 and a half, I'm pretty sure I'll be looking at the over in this unless I hear some stories about the wind really picking up. But just because it's cold does not mean you're not going to score points here. And people are trying to get ahead of that based on these cold weather thoughts coming out, but cold weather shouldn't have that much of a factor.
No, I mean, if this game was played on Saturday, it would be a stone cold under because you're going to have 30-mile-per-hour wind gusts, at least according to the look-ahead forecast. On Sunday, it's going to be clear skies. It will be darker because it's a little bit later of a game, but no wind to really speak of. 5-mile-per-hour winds, not going to be too bad whatsoever, just going to be cold. So I agree with your line of thinking there regarding the total. I think the under is the play in the first game. I think the over is the play in the second game, which is not at all what you would expect because one's in a dome and one's outside in cold weather. But to me, I do think that is the way to look at both of these games here. So, Bryan, let me ask you this. Excuse me. We've got the four best scoring offenses in the NFL here in the playoffs or in the conference championship round. I talked about this a little bit on Monday, and I just want to get your thoughts on it a little bit here too. Man, am I looking forward to seeing the prop market for the Super Bowl no matter what matchup we have.
Yeah, it's going to be some high-scoring football, and it should be a fun game because the interesting part about all these lines this week being around 3 is the Super Bowl's going to be around the pick'em range. And I've seen anything, depending on what happens, a 1.5-point favorite is probably as high as you're going to get. The bad part from a Super Bowl standpoint for myself is normally I look to play the favorite on the money line in the Super Bowl because everybody likes to play the dog on the money line. You get great value. Well, with the lines as short as they're going to be this year, that's going to be something that I can't take advantage of because it's just not going to be the same as it normally is. Normally, when the Super Bowl lines come out, you can actually take the points with the underdog and then just wait and end up and you're able to play the favorite on the money line. And you've got yourself basically a no-vig bet there where you're just looking at positive EV both ways, and you can sit back and let the game play out. And that's just one of the things that a lot of the professionals do, taking advantage. If a line is 3 and your money line is a lot less than what it normally is, that's what you play. You got to know what the value is of the numbers. And because all these 4 teams are all so equal, we're not going to run into that here. But from a definite enjoyment standpoint, where you're going to see a lot of points and you're going to see good teams playing, equal teams playing. It should be a lot of fun when the Super Bowl comes around.
All right, so we'll transition to a very different market here, and we sang the praises on last Wednesday's show of Matt Lindemann and the team over at Caesars Palace. It's doing a really good job of pushing the envelope here and really progressing the industry forward. They actually put up NIT lines here this week, NIT futures, I should say, which is absolutely incredible because we have no idea who's in the field yet. But I love the creativity. I love the thought process there with that. But Caesars opened up the MLB season win total market. So Bryan and I wanted to spend a few minutes here talking about, really some starting points for those that are starting to think about baseball. And I'm already starting to think about baseball, writing the intros to my season win total articles for each team here. So, Bryan, what are you looking at in terms of trying to get yourself prepared for the baseball season?
Well, you've got to have the ability to get into some of these guys that do this stuff all off season, and one of them is Fangraphs, just to do a tremendous job. I think it's like $50 for the whole season. You get everything they put out. It's a tremendous bargain, to be honest with you. And they've already got their projected standings on the season based on what everybody has right now. And it was interesting because I was going over what they had projected with the lines that Matt put out. And basically, they're right there where they're at, except for the few teams that are right now in the market for the two big free agent signings in offensively, and some of the guys, the Keuchels and some of the closers that are out there right now. So if there's been rumors, for example, they put the Philadelphia line, according to Fangraphs, they project the Phillies to win 80 games, but the Phillies are in on both of those, the sluggers, and they've really gone after some of the bullpen help this year. So I think he put them out at 83.5. So you have to, when you're doing it early, and I didn't get involved early last year, and that was probably as a detriment because everybody's betting Kansas City under, and I still didn't know how many of those players are going to come back and end up playing for the Royals. I did get one of them back, but if you've got a good tip on where somebody's going to go, you could take advantage of it here in these future bets. But Matt does a good job. He knows that the Milwaukees and the Dodgers and the Cubs and some of the others, the Nationals, they've talked about signing one of these two players, and so he's raised them. He raised 83.5 on the Brewers, which is 3.5 games higher than what Fangraphs picks out there. But one of the things I like to do is go back and check out how the players played the year before. Not only do you have to check injuries are a major part. If you've got a major league club and you are one of the 2 or 3 least injured players teams the year before, you could pretty much guess that team's probably going to go under the win total the following year because those things just don't happen. You go back to any sport really at the end of the year, and the teams that do the best at the end of the season are the teams that have stayed the healthiest. And so that's one of the things I always look at. One of the first things I look at is how teams did from an injury standpoint. And you go back for the Cubs. The Cubs last year didn't play as well as they had before, but obviously when you've got one of the top starting pitchers in baseball, and Hugh Darvish didn't play at all for him last year, basically, and he's supposed to be back this year. But I do have some reservations because when he did play in the American League right before that, and then he went to the Dodgers, he just wasn't the same. And I think that may have been the injury, and he was just wanted to play through it. So that's something to keep in mind. But you got to go back and check your injuries. You go back and check runs scored and runs against. And there's so many things that we do, and you're very good at it because you do the analytics. And you could put forth, just because the Red Sox won 108 games last year, you can go back and with the cluster luck and all the other things, the runs scored, runs against, you can figure out what their Pythagorean number should be. It's just amazing to me, all these things that we could do. You can go back on an individual basis and look at each individual player. Do you take a look at, for example, some of the guys who just had a breakout year last year that came out of nowhere? How do you grade those going forward? Are they going to regress to the players they were before, or are they like Scooter Gennett? All of a sudden, the last few years, he's just been a tremendous player. Everybody keeps thinking he's going to regress. Well, maybe he has found something out, and he's a different player now than he was before, which you really don't see too much by the time you get to the Major League Baseball and these guys are as old as they are. So it's a lot of fun trying to make these guesses, and once again, educated guesses in your head and on paper of how these teams are going to do. And that's a lot of fun to me because you've got a long time, even though these lines are out now, they're still a month away from spring training. So you've got a long time to go through these and take advantage of them. And that's something that we all love to do is project who we're going to like to be betting on this season. And you could use that all season long as you're getting the lines that you're looking for. You put all that work ahead of time. You could use those lines during the regular season. If you're ahead of a team or ahead of some players, starting pitchers, you can definitely take advantage of that early in the season.
Yeah, there are a lot of good things that you mentioned there. And, when you look up and down the list at how many players teams used, and you can find this very easily at Baseball Reference, 3 teams right off the bat stand out to me. Houston and Colorado both only used 41 different players, and Houston and Colorado only used 22 and 21 pitchers, respectively. Boston only used 44 players. When I see Colorado and Houston, 2 teams that got 4 starters with 30 or more starts, that's a team I'm immediately looking to go against because, as you said, they're probably not going to have the same health fortunes the following year. Another thing you can look at, Pythagorean win-loss. It's a standings metric based on run differential. There is a formula in, but when you see a team that's a big outlier from its actual record to its Pythagorean win-loss record, that's a starting point for me as well. Or there's a metric over at Fangraphs called base runs, and they spit out a run differential and then a standings metric with that. It's a context-neutral environment. So basically, it takes all of the individual outcomes and assumes that they're all equal, as opposed to, teams that really overachieve with men on base, stuff like that. So that's something I definitely look into as well. And these are all starting points, and then I start to look at the personnel, look at the projections, look at the expected performance, how guys did last year. I do a very deep dive with Major League Baseball. It's the one sport where I feel like I have an edge because I'm so analytically driven with it. So I'm very excited to get underway, very excited to dig into a lot of these teams. But, as you said, a lot of things, a lot of moving parts still, and that's why I respect Matt putting these numbers up as early as he did. There are a lot of free agents that still have to sign. There are a lot of trades that are still coming as well. Obviously, Manny Machado and Bryce Harper are the 2 biggest names, but there are a lot of guys out there that will help teams, will structure their bullpens a little bit differently, give them some more starting pitching depth, stuff like that. So you don't have to dive on these right away when the offshore market opens or the Vegas market opens in other places, but still something you want to be aware of here as football is winding down.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned base runs, which is very similar to the cluster luck that I mentioned. Cluster luck is in the book Trading Bases by Joe Pita. He's really, that book, if you're looking to bet baseball, I highly recommend Trading Bases. A lot of it has to do with the stock market because he's been a trader also over the years. But he talks about breaking baseball down, and I believe he's writing a golf book now on golf handicapping. So Joe Pita, a friend of ours, and we've met a few times. Very, very intelligent man. He's really been at the forefront of this new analytics and gambling on it for the sports bettors. So make sure you pick up his book, Trading Bases, and if you're looking for a starting point, highly recommend it.
Bryan Leonard, professional handicapper over at WagerTalk.com. What's going on right now, Bryan?
Heading in to do videos today. Excited for that. We're going to have a few people talking about the game, so similar to your podcast, we're going to have a few groups breaking down the games for this weekend. Hopefully you can pick out a nugget. I'm looking forward to it to get some other opinions on these games, because right now, based on the current lines, I don't know if I'm going to get too involved in it. There's some things I'm looking for in these games, but until I get the correct number or get correct information that I can build on for my play, It's early, and the good thing we have is the less games we have to cover, the more opinions we can get on those games, and we plan to have a lot of opinions on these games in the videos today. So you can catch those all out at WagerTalk.tv.
And, of course, you can follow Bryan on Twitter at BLeonardSports. Bryan Leonard, WagerTalk.com. Appreciate the time, as always, man. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds good. Good luck, everyone.
There you go. There's Bryan Leonard, again, professional handicapper over at WagerTalk.com and at BLeonardSports on Twitter.